Welcome to Bunny Trails, a whimsical adventure of idioms and other turns of phrase. I'm Shauna Harrison.
And I'm Dan Pugh. Each week, we take an idiom or other turn of phrase and try to tell the story from its entry into the English language to how it's used today. When you were a kid, did you ever have a big day ahead of you and your mom, dad, grandparent, or some other familial authority figure make a big meal and tell you to eat plenty of it because it would stick to your ribs? It was certainly an occurrence in my childhood, mostly from my grandma. And this week, we're going to look into that phrase, stick to your ribs. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, stick to your ribs means, quote, of food to be nourishing and filling, to sustain a person for a long time, end quote.
I was like a really skinny kid,
Yeah.
And so sometimes family members would say that I needed some good stick to your ribs food
Yeah.
gain some weight or something. It was not effective until I, was a teenager, which I think is when that happens to humans sometimes.
Well, there were definitely most teenagers, citation needed, go through some hormonal changes as they are growing up. And I would imagine some of those changes maybe would have affected you if it was your teenage years when that started happening.
Certainly the extra food did not help when I was 8, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Well, I want to start with the work A Collection of English Proverbs by John Ray. And this edition that I'm using here was written in 1670. In it, the phrase shows up, but without a definition. So I cannot be sure that this is the same usage as our phrase today, but I think it's worth mentioning, where it says, quote, 39, to stick by the ribs, end quote. I also saw the phrase in French and English dictionaries and in Latin to English dictionaries in the late 1600s and early to mid 1700s, but no definitions were provided there either. Now, what I do know is that stick to the ribs can also be a reference to someone who is starving, right? Someone who you can see their ribs and their skin is sticking to the ribs. And I definitely saw references to that in the 16 and 1700s. So I don't know if that is what they're referencing here as far as like skin to stick by the ribs or to stick to the ribs, as in the skin is sticking to the ribs. And so therefore you can see their ribs. And I don't know if that was the impetus for how we use it now, meaning of food that is nourishing and filling that would sustain a person, as a way of like, now you can't see the ribs anymore. The food is sticking to the ribs now. So I don't know if that is how that comes about, but certainly we know that the phrase was being used in some context to talk about sticking to the ribs, as in the skin sticking to the ribs. And so it wouldn't be difficult to see the transition. I just don't have the evidence to support that. I just have a lot of things that say it is a phrase, but not how that phrase is used, not what it means, right?
Awesome, yeah.
And the thing that I think is really important here is that in John Ray's work, A Collection of English Proverbs, there are some places that he defines stuff, which means this phrase had been around for long enough or was in such popular use that Ray didn't feel it was necessary to define it. So people just knew what it meant when you said to stick by the ribs. So that I think is also interesting and telling, but not helpful in getting to the answer by itself. So the first time I found the phrase being used outside of a dictionary or a translation guide was in a letter written by Edmund Burke in 1795. Interestingly, he was also an early user of the figurative phrase, the lion's share. Mr. Burke is sometimes called the philosophical founder of modern British conservatism, and he wrote a series of letters, sometimes called the Letters on a Regicide Peace, in opposition to the revolution in France. He feared the revolution's rejection of tradition and inherited values would result in chaos and tyranny. But moving away from who he was, there is a quite interesting point to the way he uses the phrase. In the work, he uses the phrase as a metaphor. Let's take a look. Quote, "These ephemerides of politics are not made for our slow and coarse understandings. Our appetite demands a piece of resistance. we require some food that will stick to the ribs, end quote. So in this, he isn't speaking of literal food. So
All right.
the phrase that stick to the ribs doesn't mean the food will literally stick to the ribs, right? It just means that it's nourishing. But in this case, the food is metaphorical too in this use. So he's adapting what must already be a well-known phrase and one known and used in high society to make a point about something else, which means this phrase must have been in use for quite some time, and that makes me think that early inclusions in the 16 to 1700s may either be the usage we know it to be now, or there was a transition somewhere in there where in the 1600s maybe it was something else, maybe stick by the ribs, meaning they're not well nourished enough, and then something that will stick to the ribs could become something that is nourishing. So I don't know, but clearly somewhere around this time frame, Burke thought his reader would know what this meant, and in a way that he felt he could use it metaphorically too, which means there's a unique understanding of something to be able to take a idiomatic phrase and then use it metaphorically in another way too.
Right.
But without context in the early works, no definition, no used in a sentence type of thing, we just can't be sure. Now, on a side note, I had to look up the word ephemerides. It is the plural of ephemeris, which is Latin for diary, and it also comes from the ancient Greek word for diary or journal. Now, an ephemeris is also the word we use to describe a book with astronomical tables, one that tracks the position of stars, planets, and other celestial bodies. Britain had a nautical almanac and astronomical ephemeris at the time of Burke's writing, so this is likely what he's referencing. But learning more about the ephemerides, the plural, led me down a bunny trail that we're going to pick back up on in the behind the scenes video, which airs every Friday on our Patreon. That is patreon.com/bunnytrailspod. Back to our phrase. This one is from The Magnet, Agriculture, Commercial, and Family Gazette. This is out of London, England, and is dated October 31st, 1845. Our phrase appears in part of a court record where Mr. J. Jenkins gave notice to his employer, Dr. Dalrymple, who then fired him on the spot, in apparent violation of the contract. It seems the biggest arguments were over the food being provided to the servants, of which Mr. Jenkins was previously one. And this is from the transcript. Quote, Jenkins, and twice a week we'd pudding made of sawdust and pig's dung. Doctor, Yee lee, they are real Scotch puddings direct fra Edinburgh, a perfect dainty. Jenkins, we'd nothing for breakfast but gruel and swipes. Doctor, crowdy and yill, that wad stick to your ribs. End quote. I apologize to all Scots out there for the butchering of Dr. Dalrymple's particular take on your great language. The court stenographer, whoever that would have been, also clearly had some troubles with it, but wrote it in phonetically. So hopefully I haven't screwed it up too much. But the stick to your ribs, I thought, okay, yeah, this is exactly what the doctor's talking about. He's trying to say he's been feeding them basically Scottish food, basically, and the servants all find that to be atrocious. But the doctor, the master of the house, said that he's been feeding them good Scottish food. It sticks to your ribs, you know. So this is the difference here that these two are arguing about. However, the difference is not one that matters because, according to the contract, Mr. Jenkins could give notice and say, "Hey, I'll be leaving in 2 weeks" or whatever, and then Dr. Dalrymple couldn't fire him over that, right? He had to let him serve out that term. And he did fire him on the spot, which was a violation of the contract. So he did have to pay Mr. Jenkins for the 2 weeks of pay that he would have received for working. The food,
Interesting.
notwithstanding, had nothing to do with it. But Jenkins was trying to build a case that the doctor was not doing good, and this was the reason he was leaving, is because the food was awful. He said, but the doctor was trying to showcase that Jenkins was just being a whiny baby, and that that Jenkins was leaving for no good reason. Which presumably maybe you had to have a good reason to leave the contract. I don't know, but whatever it was, it didn't work, and the doctor had to pay out.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, if he was feeding him bad sawdust food, then
Well, I don't believe that he was actually doing that. I believe he was just feeding him things that Jenkins didn't like.
maybe he just described it that way. It's like when kids are like
Sawdust and pig's dung.
describing, yeah.
Yeah, because Jenkins does admit a little bit later that, he was being a bit
Maybe it was-
metaphorical.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so here's an example in the Oxford Times. This is out of Oxfordshire, England, and it is dated September 12th, 1885. This one is an advertisement for what looks like a confectioner or a candy store. As we've mentioned before on the show, the phrase is understood by the masses if it's being used in mass appeal advertising, like the newspaper would have been in 1886. Here it is, quote, "Sweets, sweets, sweets. Novelties. Stick to your ribs, Lucky Banks, holiday dips, chocolate jaw pullers, school board whackers, old chums gifts, try your luck, etc., etc., etc. Delivered daily to all parts Oxford." End quote.
There you go.
Yeah, I love the idea of someone bringing sweets to my home every day.
Yeah.
That appeals to me.
Yeah,
If you just
me
brought me like a
too.
couple of pieces of chocolate every day, I wouldn't have enough in here to eat too many of them, but I would know I'd have more the next day. It's like, when they hand out the Oreos or the cookies or whatever and you're like, all right, I've got my cookie and my Hawaiian punch or my milk or my whatever I'm drinking, and I eat those, and then you really just want more cookies, but you can't have them because they're not giving them to you. I'm thinking
Right.
like when you're 6 or 8 or something. But
Okay,
anyway,
yeah.
yeah, so it's that kind of situation, but for adults.
That's perfect because it's like, yeah, it's like self-control, only it's not self-control.
Yeah, exactly. Here's one from the Adbury Banner and Wodonga Express out of New South Wales, Australia, dated December 13th, 1907. Quote, "The Department of Agriculture of the United States is devoting itself to the task of finding out the heaviest yielding and best adapted legume for each particular section of the United States. One of the most promising of these, which is being experimented with for a large portion of the country where the winters are not too severe, is the Egyptian beerseem. This is a rank grower and makes a splendid forage, and it is considered indispensable throughout a large section of the Nile Valley. Containing so much nitrogenous matter, the legumes are very strong foods. We have all heard the statement that beans will stick to your ribs. Either as stock or human food, all the legumes are muscle makers, and hard work can be done when they are used as a ration." End quote.
Hmm.
I thought that was very interesting. That sent me a little bit more of a rabbit hole, but just a real short thing. It appears beerseem clover, the legume in the article, is planted in many areas in the United States today and is primarily used as a cover crop, which means it reduces soil erosion and keeps weeds from growing. It's also used as green manure, which means it's a nitrogen replacement for the soil, and as forage, which is a feed for livestock, and also as a wild plot, which feeds wild animals like rabbit or deer. It's also, of note, a good pollinator plant for bees. So it appears this task that was undertaken in the early 1900s by the Department of Agriculture was helpful and worked. And they do grow this particular berseem clover all over the parts of the United States where it grows. It's not hardy to frost, so it's got shorter growing seasons in some places than others. But yeah, it's pretty common to be seen in places where they grow a crop or two during the growing season, spring and then fall, and then over the winter they'll plant this instead and let it grow up.
Interesting.
Yeah. Here we come back to a familiar source, the 1927 Dictionary of Slang, American Speech, Volume 2, edited by Louise Pound, Kemp Malone, and Arthur Kennedy. This is under the section of dialect words from West Virginia, although obviously the phrase has been used in other places as well. Their format uses the phrase, then defines it, and then they use it in a sentence. So here we go. Quote, stick to your ribs to eat substantial food. Meat and potatoes will stick to your ribs. End quote.
Okay.
I'll bring another one here. This is from the Daily Gleaner out of Kingston, Jamaica, dated January 16th, 1935. Quote, it is used, I say, in the making of stick in the ribs. In other words, and to put this matter less familiarly, flour dumplings are manufactured out of flour. And in Jamaica, we have developed a system of making dumplings out of flour, which, when boiled, has the toughness of a cannonball, the filling qualities of an ox, and a tendency to reside within the stomach as though it would permanently take up its habitation there. Hence the colloquial appellation of stick in the ribs. End quote.
That's amazing.
That is amazing.
Why?
I think maybe he doesn't like that food.
I guess. Yeah. Wow.
Tendency to reside within the stomach as though it would permanently take up its habitation there.
Very
How funny. Stick in the ribs. Well, one more before we move to our modern usage. This one is also an advertisement, but I thought it was interesting because it's during World War II, which makes the concepts of our phrase, food that is sustaining and filling, more important than maybe it would be in some other times. This is from a newspaper called Sikeston Standard out of Missouri, USA, and it's dated July 13th, 1945. And it is an ad for a grocery store called Robert's. Quote, buy food that sticks to your ribs. These wartime demand the best in all of us, which means the foods that will supply the most in physical energy, good wholesome foods, high in quality foods. The best is the cheapest is especially true in foods. These are the kind of foods we have and sell, and our splendid patronage is proof that the people of this community want such foods, foods that stick to the ribs. End quote. It's like that advertisement was written for this show, to be able to just say it's got stick of the ribs in the title, and the last thing is our phrase, and I was like, this is amazing.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. I don't know that I've ever heard the best is the cheapest. I don't think I've ever.
Well,
it says is especially
times.
true in foods, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe was just a wartime phrase.
I'm gonna guess so because it was
It might be worth me checking into and falling into a different rabbit hole over.
Or is the best a brand? Is that the brand?
I don't think so.
Name,
No.
A brand name?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
The capitalization is untenable in this, so it's like you can't use that to you can't use that to tell. Random words are capitalized. I don't know. Maybe it's a code actually. Is activating some sort of a German agent or something. I don't know.
Jeez. I don't think it was.
I wouldn't know. All right. Well, with that, it is time to move to our more modern usage. But first, we need to say thank you to our sponsors.
This episode is sponsored by our amazing patrons on Patreon. And the cool thing about Patreon is it is 100% free to join the community. We have new things every weekday on the feeds. On Mondays, we have a conversation about what movies, shows, books, podcasts, and whatever else everyone is enjoying. Tuesday, see early access to the week's podcast. Wednesdays have all the links, books, songs, and other content mentioned in the week's episode. Thursday has patrons-only polls, and Fridays are our lightly edited behind-the-scenes video featuring all the cut content, goofs, and bonus facts you could imagine.
We've got some other pretty cool stuff too, like original digital artwork once a month made by Shauna, and direct access to talk with us. No algorithms getting in the way of what we see or don't see. Plus, you can get awesome name recognition like Pat Rowe does every episode. And our top spot is currently occupied by the amazing Mary Halsig Lopez. You can join the Bunny Trails community for free at Bunny Trails Pod on Patreon.
That's patreon.com/bunnytrailspod.
Stick to Your Ribs is a dark, gritty 2001 song by Zealous Fuel. The lyrics work better as a story than the music works as a song, in my opinion. Here is the first verse and the chorus. Quote, something will sink its claws into you. Something will do everything to you. Something, something, something. Out of nowhere, it grabs onto you. Out of nowhere, it holds on like glue. Out of. Nothing else sticks like that to your skin. Nothing else will break out from within. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Slowly but surely, it sticks to your ribs. It sticks to your ribs. End quote.
Cool.
Yeah, I guess if you're into horror stuff, then that's fine.
I kind of like it.
Yep, that tracks. That tracks so much. Next up is a 2004 book by James Michael Pratt. It's called Mom, the Woman Who Made Oatmeal Stick to My Ribs. Here's the synopsis from the publisher. Quote, nationally best-selling author James Michael Pratt pays tribute to all mothers through this powerful memories of his own mother, a typical everyday mom. Jim's stories bring back memories of our own childhood interactions with Mom and the important values that she tried so hard to instill in our lives. James Michael Pratt writes, oatmeal may not literally stick to the ribs, but I never ever eat it without hearing my mom's voice. So it wasn't just the oatmeal that stuck to this boy. The porridge was a symbol of something else that would stay with me. Her love and pride in me and the time-tested values she taught, which provided real warmth and a shield against the punches life would deliver. End quote.
That's really sweet.
Yeah, it seems like a sweet book. Here's a couple of quotes from the author that kind of spoke to me from the book. Maybe they'll touch a point with you too. Quote, Jimmy, eat your oatmeal. It'll stick to your ribs. I recall as a boy feeling around my rib cage after eating my oatmeal and wondering if it took a trip that other foods didn't. Maybe oatmeal really did hang out down there. End quote. And
Awesome.
This one, quote, the advice of our mothers. Maybe we don't always understand it as children. How does my failure to clean my plate affect the starving children of Africa? But it carries a message of love and concern that reaches far beyond words, end quote.
That's amazing.
This guy is writing basically about my home life. This is what I think. I think it's like I heard both of those statements growing up, mostly more from my grandparents than my parents. Yeah, I mean, he's writing about times that I spent time with my grandparents right there.
That's awesome.
Because my grandmother was a big fan of both of those statements.
Fantastic.
Stick to Your Ribs was an episode of Guy's Big Bite, which aired on September 15th, 2007. The show is hosted by Guy Fieri, and it ran for 19 seasons from 2006 to 2016. The episode was from the third season, episode 5. Here's the synopsis from the Food Network. Quote, Guy has perfected the art of ribs with his big-time flavor recipe, a homemade spiced rub topped with his spicy cherry glaze. Cool your mouth off with some mac-daddi-roni salad, plus a cookie pie cocktail, end quote. Boy, that's really hard to keep a straight face and say those words from Guy Fieri there.
Okay.
Woof. mac-daddi-roni. Okay. All right. Actually, the
Mac-daddi-roni.
spiced cherry glaze sounds really good. I think I would really like that. That sounds
And
that
then
sounds
there was
awesome.
a what? Cookie something?
Cookie pie cocktail.
Cookie pie cocktail. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not usually a big fan of sweets in my booze, but yeah, sometimes, every once in a while.
Yeah.
Stick to Ya Ribs is an electronic 2012 song by Peven Eskrit off the album Miami Conference Essentials Volume 1. There are words to this song, but they are buried in it, and I couldn't find the lyrics online, which is odd. But I guess I'm not sure the lyrics were important. They were almost really another percussive element to the song. We'll link to it on the Patreon if you want to hear it, like we do with all of the Modern Use features. So you can check that out, patreon.com/bunnytrailspod. The Food Network is back at it again, this time with Stick to Your Ribs, the second episode of the reality show Eat, Sleep, Barbecue. This was hosted by Rashad Jones, and it aired for one season in 2017. Here's the synopsis of this episode from the Food Network. Quote, Rashad Jones hits the road in search of pitmasters who are cooking up delicious and unique versions of barbecued ribs. First, Rashad hangs with a rising barbecue star in Atlanta, Georgia, who's serving tender pork ribs straight from a slow-cooked whole hog with bonus sides passed down from generational recipes. Then Rashad takes on alligator ribs in St. Louis, Missouri, along with a towering barbecue smoked burger. Rashad's final stop introduces him to a local spot serving up deep-fried baby back ribs with a side of heartwarming collard greens. End quote.
Well, that definitely sounds like, home cooking.
Yeah, all of that sounds good. I've had alligator before, but I don't think I've ever had alligator ribs. So
I haven't
that would
either,
be,
yeah.
I would be down to try that. I want to close out with a category I found on the Goodreads website, and this is called Stick to Your Ribs Books. It is much like our first attestation in 1795, using the phrase as a metaphor for its meaning. The list of books are ones that stay with you for a while. And Shauna, I'm going to give some examples of this here in a few minutes, but I would love to know what books have stuck with you. So in this case, I'm not sure the necessity of sustaining is part of stick to your ribs in this case, but they're the kind of books that live rent free for a while. Here are a few of the books that are on the list. Poems and Fragments by Sappho. Behave, The Biology of Humans at Our Best and Worst by Robert N. Sapolsky. East Asia, The Great Tradition by Edwin O. Reichshauer. On Contradiction by Mao Zedong. And Gender Trouble, Feminism and the Subversion of Identity by Judith Butler. So, Shauna, I will now ask you, what are some books that you have read that have kind of stuck to your ribs?
I would say The Life of Pi. I thought that was really intriguing.
Okay.
There's also this book called The Queue, and I'll have to find the name of the author, but that was such a really intriguing and insightful book. Basma Abdel Aziz is the author of that one, and I read it several years ago, and I still just stands out
Gotcha.
for me.
And Life of Pi was written by Jan Martel.
Yes, and then more recently is the Body Keeps Score.
Okay.
That one just kind of keeps little pieces of it keep kind of rolling back around in my mind. I probably more books than that. They're like something will just kind of be pulled back out and it'll bring it all back, and then I'll be thinking about that book again. But those are some that really stand out. What about for you?
So there are two books that I've read in the last year and a half that have really stuck with me afterwards. The first one is The Badass Librarians of Timbuktu, which is a real account by that is compiled by Joshua Hammer and turned into this book form. But it's about the race to save some of the world's most precious manuscripts from the Taliban. And try this whole process of from rebuilding these ancient Arabic texts and restoring the books. And then when Al-Qaeda, I said the Taliban, I should say Al-Qaeda. So when Al-Qaeda then moves into this area of Africa, they have to put these books and things into hiding. So that's a really fascinating story that I thought was really cool. And then one that I've read more recently is called My Sister, the Serial Killer. And it is, I think it's written by a Nigerian author. I might mess up her first name, but it's Yoinkin Braithwaite. And the story is really fascinating because it's a thriller novel, right? So this it was her debut book, really, and I thought it was really fascinating. And it's kind of old. I came to it way late, but I think it was written in 2018. And the concept is that she is a nurse who is frequently having to cover up for actions that her sister has taken, right? And there's twists and turns, and there's family life, and so this whole thing, really culminates in kind of this surprise I never saw coming at the end. And I was like, whoa. So I thought it was a really good book. And just the way the story unfolds and, hearing about the family life and that kind of stuff I thought it was really fascinating for me.
That's really cool.
All right. Well, this is a phrase that we definitely used in my house growing up in Texas. Usually it was applied to big breakfasts of eggs, bacon, sausage, biscuits and gravy, toast, and a variety of other options sprinkled in. And I still to this day see biscuits and gravy and many other breakfast foods as my go-to stick to your ribs kind of food. I'm also the kind of person who will eat breakfast any time of the day, so anytime I'm really hungry, I know I can jump into something that will fill me up and stay with me for a while. Well, that's about all we have for today. If you have any thoughts on the show or pop culture references we should have included, reach out to us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/bunnytrailspod, or comment on our website, bunnytrailspod.com.
It is poll time. Recently, we asked our patrons, Fritos, Doritos, or Cheetos? It turns out The three were a virtual tie. So we need to arbitrarily pick a winner. And here at Bunny Trails, we vote the winner is us, the people who get to eat them.
I love it.
Yeah.
I agree, actually.
JPG notes their favorite, quote, Fritos are the only one of those I am not allergic to, so Fritos it is, end quote. Same for me. I love Fritos.
All right, fair enough. Well, Jan added, quote, nacho cheese Doritos. I also like the retro taco flavored ones and Cool Ranch. Not a fan of the barbecue, hot mustard, or other flavors. I do enjoy some Fritos in a chili Frito pie, end quote. I am a sucker for the Doritos seasonal flavors. One time I got a bag of the ketchup flavored Doritos and they were a bit intense. I didn't really love them, but I was resolute in my stubbornness that I was going to finish the bag anyway. I did enlist my son's boyfriend to help me. He is as stubborn as I am in some ways. And so between the two of us, we did manage to power through that bag of ketchup Doritos. Cheetos are a staple of my travel diet. I like to get a variety box of the lunch-size bags, and then I have a different flavor every day with my sandwich, which is usually either some sort of a turkey lunch meat, chicken lunch meat, or peanut butter and jelly.
Amazing.
Yeah. But then also, I hadn't even thought about it like this until Jan said it, but I also love Frito chili pies, topped with nacho-style cheese and a dollop of sour cream and maybe a few jalapenos if I want some spice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this entire episode is just made me hungry. That's all this episode has done is I am famished now. I eat breakfast, a good breakfast, but I am now absolutely starving and I need some good stick to my ribs kind of food.
Well, as a reminder, our silly polls mean absolutely nothing and are not scientifically valid. And patrons of all levels, including our free tiers, can take part. Head over to patreon.com/bunnytrailspod to take this week's poll. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week. Until then, remember,
Words belong to their users.